The Norman Conquest of England in 1066 was one of the most significant turning points in English history, marking the end of Anglo-Saxon rule and the beginning of a new era under Norman leadership. The roots of the conquest lay in the complex succession crisis that followed the death of King Edward the Confessor, who died in January 1066 without an heir. Edward's death left the throne open to multiple claimants, including Harold Godwinson, who was chosen by the Anglo-Saxon Council to be king, and William, Duke of Normandy, who claimed that Edward had promised him the throne. William's claim was further strengthened by his familial ties to Edward and by his assertion that Harold had previously sworn an oath to support William's succession. While Harold Godwinson was busy defending his kingdom from a Norwegian invasion in the north, William gathered support from the Norman aristocracy and the papacy, assembling a formidable army of Norman, French, Flemish, and Breton troops. In late September 1066, as soon as the winds turned favorable, William sailed across the English Channel and landed at Pevensey in Sussex on 28 September. He quickly established a base and began raiding the surrounding countryside to secure supplies and provoke Harold into action. Meanwhile, Harold had just defeated the Norwegian King Harald Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in the north, a victory that left his army exhausted and depleted. Nevertheless, upon hearing of William's landing, Harold's force marched his remaining troops south, covering nearly 200 miles in just a few days. The decisive confrontation came on 14 October 1066 at the Battle of Hastings. Harold's army, composed mainly of infantry, took up a defensive position on a ridge, forming a shield wall. William's forces, by contrast, included cavalry and archers, giving them greater tactical flexibility. The battle raged for most of the day, with the Norman cavalry initially being repulsed by the English shield wall. At one point, the Normans began to retreat, possibly due to a rumor that William had been killed. William famously removed his helmet to show he was alive, rallying his troops and turning the tide of battle. The Normans then employed a feigned retreat tactic, luring parts of the English line into breaking formation. Eventually, Harold was killed, legend says, by an arrow to the eye, as depicted in the Bayeux tapestry, and the English army collapsed. With Harold dead and his army defeated, William advanced toward London. He faced sporadic resistance, but managed to isolate the city and force its leaders to submit. On Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey, cementing his victory. However, the conquest was not complete with the coronation alone. Over the next 5 years, William faced numerous rebellions, especially in the north of England, where resistance was particularly fierce. William responded with brutal efficiency, most notably through the harrying of the north, a campaign of devastation that destroyed villages, crops, and livestock to break the will of the rebels and prevent further uprisings. To maintain control over his new kingdom, William implemented a range of measures. He confiscated the lands of Anglo-Saxon nobles who had opposed him and redistributed them to his Norman supporters, fundamentally altering the English aristocracy. Castles were built across the country, often in the Motte and Bailey style, to serve as military strongpoints and symbols of Norman authority. The introduction of the feudal system meant that all land was now held directly from the king in exchange for military service, further consolidating William's power. The Norman conquest also brought profound changes to English society and culture. The Norman elite replaced the Anglo-Saxon ruling class, and Norman French became the language of the court, government, and law. The English language absorbed thousands of Norman French words, and the church was restructured with Norman clergy placed in key positions. Architecturally, the Normans introduced Romanesque styles, building grand cathedrals and castles that still stand today. William's rule was further solidified by the commissioning of the Domesday Book in 1086, a comprehensive survey of land holdings and resources across England, which allowed for more effective taxation and governance. Despite their relatively small numbers, the Normans succeeded in controlling a much larger native population through a combination of military strength, strategic land distribution, and administrative innovation. In summary, the Norman Conquest of England was achieved through a combination of military prowess, strategic timing, and ruthless consolidation of power. William's victory at the Battle of Hastings was only the beginning. The subsequent years were marked by determined efforts to suppress resistance and reshape English society. The legacy of the conquest is evident in the language, laws, architecture, and social structures of England, making it one of the most transformative events in the nation's history.